bakery tools or whatever it was they were doing, and they all trooped off to Runnymede. So at Runnymede there was the king, yes, there were the barons, yes, but there were also thousands upon thousands of the free men of England, and they forced King John to issue Magna Carta, or the Great Charter. Archbishop Langton, who was the Pope's choice of archbishop but was actually a very, very good Englishman, discovered in the files tucked away the Charter of Liberties from 100 years before, from Henry I. And he looked at it and he thought, wow, this is great, this is fantastic. And it was used as the basis for Magna Carta. And if you put the Charter of Liberties there and Magna Carta there, the differences between the two documents are minimal. And we know that the Charter of Liberties was a restatement of Alfred's law. And because that was a restatement of Alfred's law, Magna Carta is a restatement of Alfred's law. Now, in 1366, the then Pope, checking his bank account, as popes are apt to do, suddenly realised that he'd never had this money from England. So he wrote to King Edward and he said, well, as you're a vassal king and I want my money, and unless you pay me all the back money that I'm owed, I will take action against you and remove you. And King Edward didn't know what to do about this, so he sent for the bishops, who were all Roman Catholics, and he asked them what he should do. Then he sent for the lords, who again were all Roman Catholics, and he said, what should I do? And they went away and they talked to the commons. And then the following day they came back, and first the bishops, then the lords, then the commons came in and they saw Edward. And they all told him the same thing. England did not belong to John. He only holds it in trust for those who follow on. It therefore wasn't his to give it away, therefore it's not given away, therefore the money is not to be paid, and you're not a vassal king. Right? So that actually is an extraordinarily important constitutional ruling, which applies as much today as it did then, and we'll come back to where it applies today. So Edward dutifully wrote a letter to the Pope telling him, politely of course, to go paint his face yellow and hide it in a corner somewhere because he wasn't getting his money. And basically that was the end of that matter. Now, in 1351, it was common for people in this country, and had been for some time, that if you fell out with the king, you would appeal your case to the Pope, who for some completely inexplicable reason, unknown to us English, but which he, who was Italian, seemed to think was quite sensible, he felt he appointed every king in the world, not ours. But he thought he did. And basically, he tried this with King Alfred, because King Alfred had a bloke he wanted to be archbishop. And so the archbishop was there designate to be appointed by Alfred, and what happens, the Pope sent him an archbishop from Rome, and Alfred turned round as Pope from Rome and he said, well, sorry, don't need you, got another guy better than you, I'm having him. So the Pope turned him round and sent him back and said, you are a vassal king of mine because I appoint every king in the world, and if in fact you don't accept my archbishop, I will remove you as king, and we will appoint a new king who will accept my archbishop. And Alfred said, I was elected king of the English by the English. I will only ever do what is in the best interests of the English. Right? If you want me to do something, ask me nicely and I will consider it. Don't tell me because I ain't listening. Go away. And that was the first time ever when anybody in this country told somebody in a position of authority in another country to get lost. What happens in England is for the English to decide and nobody else. Now, people were appealing cases to the Pope. So Edward III in 1351 had produced an act called Praemunire. Now Praemunire was a brilliant law, because if you breached it, and what it said was that if you appealed a case out of the court in this country to a foreign jurisdiction, that was a Praemunire. And because you were going over the king's head, that amounted to an act of high treason. We're not going to kill you. What we would do is we would take everything that you own away from you. So if you happen to be an earl or a duke and you appealed to the Pope over something, all of a sudden you lost your earldom and your dukedom and you were chucked out on the street with just the clothes you were wearing. And everybody in the country, including your own wife and children, or your parents, will refuse permission to help you. Because if they did, that was a Praemunire and they would be chucked out on the street with you. So it's actually a fate worse than death, really, isn't it? Because you're going to go trumping around the streets till you fall over with hunger and exhaustion, and you just die where you fall. But if you went back and you said to the king, I'm sorry, I don't know what came over me, I had a mad moment when I did that, I apologise profusely, then you would get all your stuff back again and you could carry on, you'd been taught the lesson. Well, in 1392, Richard II was still having the same problem, and he in fact put the Act of Praemunire on as statute law, passed it through Parliament as a statute law. And when when King Henry the VIII came to the throne, he in fact developed a thing known as, now I've forgotten it. This doesn't happen often, I have to say. He developed this idea that whatever the king did, that was right. You didn't have to have a trial. And it was shown, it was evidenced by the fact that the Bishop of Rochester had a cook called Richard Rose. Richard Rose was upset by the bishop, so whatever it was he put in the meal, it was really good because it killed 17 people. It's called a Henry VIII power, I've got it. So Henry VIII, who was a mate of the Bishop of Rochester's, ordered that Richard Rose be taken to Smithfield Market and boiled alive. And that's exactly what happened. He was boiled alive. Now, that's what they call a Henry VIII power. Now, Parliament today will tell you that they rule with Henry VIII powers. But Henry VIII powers were actually illegal when Henry VIII used them. It just happened to be that Henry VIII was an arrogant bully and nobody would stand up and say, "Oi, you can't do that, or we'll get rid of you." Because we do from time to time get rid of our kings, one way or another. When his daughter came to the throne, Queen Elizabeth, the Pope considered her to be a heretic. And so he authorised anybody to kill Queen Elizabeth, and he said that they would achieve rewards both on this earth and in heaven. And of course Elizabeth I was a little bit unamused by all this, so she re-enacted her father's statute of supremacy, Act of Supremacy, as the Act of Supremacy of 1559, and that statute contains an oath. Now, there's an awful lot more of the oath, but the important bit is the bit which says that no foreign prince, person, prelate, state or potentate hath or ought to have any power, jurisdiction, superiority, preeminence or authority, ecclesiastical or spiritual, within this realm. Talk about covering all the bases. Our ancestors, believe me, were not stupid. They really were not stupid. In fact, medieval farmers produced nearly as much an acre as farmers in 1940. And don't forget, farmers in 1940 were using fertilisers the medieval farmers didn't have, and lots of mechanical equipment the medieval farmers didn't have. So it showed that they had a far better understanding of the natural world that they lived in that they were able to produce such a large amount of crops. Anyway,